everyone. I'm Terry and I'm here. So today is what I guess a lot of vloggers call story time, but it's not really story time. It's an explanation of one of the typical days in county jail in Los Angeles County Jail. I don't know how the other jails in other counties or states operate, but I do know, unfortunately, a lot about how the LA County Jail operates. And this one today is about court days in jail when you have to fight your court case from jail because they're not letting you post bail, so you're stuck in there. And in 2017, they finally put me in jail and kept me in there because I had two cases, and they quite quickly found me guilty on one, and they rescinded revoked my bail from the other case that I was on, even though I was actually also on an ankle monitor. And the judge Herskovitz, which he's so crooked, he rescinded my bail and would not let me stay out pending the other case. So I was stuck in jail and I couldn't get out, so I had to fight the second and last case, while incarcerated in the county. And so there's actually two facets to this story time, which is court dates in the county jail. There's one where, from the point of view of a general population inmate and how that process is conducted for the day when you're taken to court. But there's also a second facet, which is in my case, because they actually had me as a form of retribution, not for anything that I'd done, because all the times that I've been there, and I've been in there several times, I've never had any instances of violence except once. And so they put me in solitary and they keep me in there all the time because I had a lawsuit against them forever ago. And so every time that I've been in there, even unrelated to the case that I had a lawsuit for, they automatically throw me in solitary confinement, which is also called K-10s, and you're in there with different inmates for different cases and different reasons. Mine was strictly administrative, and because they just want to keep me like that, they're stupid. What they say about the people who work for the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department is actually true, and I know it firsthand. These are peasant class, working class. They're, for the most part, not just on a lower level of education. I'm not speaking for all of them, just for a lot of them. But they're also, they're ignorant. They have their own class that they have their own lifestyle, and it isn't one that you would call, mainstream, depending on how you define it. I know how I define it. So, at any rate, so when you're in the county jail and you're fighting a case and your court date comes up, no matter where you're being kept in the jail, where I won't say housed, I don't call that a house, it's where you're residing or being confined, whether you're confined in general population or in solitary like me. They wake you up really early, notoriously early, so it's about 4 o'clock in the morning. And so, but for the most part, if your court date is coming up, so you're prepared. But there are some times when you don't know, they catch you by surprise, and the judge issues an order to take you out to court. So that's the only time you wouldn't be prepared. So they blast the names over the speaker for general population inmates at about 4 in the morning, and they get you up. They turn all the lights on, really bright. So even if you're not being taken to court, you're going to be awake, unless you're on some heavy medication, which I've never been. So, and I'm a light sleeper. I'm a penitentiary sleeper, is what I would call it, just to make fun of myself. Anyways, So you get up, you get ready, which doesn't involve a lot because I mean, what are you gonna wear except the jail uniform they give you? So, um, and then you have breakfast. So breakfast consists of them giving you a plastic bag with two pre-packaged cellophane slices of wheat bread and a small carton of milk, um, a packet of jelly, which is more like syrup, colored syrup, you know, and for the most part, an apple and a pouch or packet of really greasy, sugary peanut butter, which is made with rapeseed oil or cottonseed oil or both. And they call these so-called meals that they give you in the county jail nutritionally balanced Title 15 meals, but they're not nutritionally balanced. They may be Title 15 meals, but they are absolutely not nutritionally balanced. And that's when you're healthy, when you're physically healthy, you're not getting all your nutrients because in the case of when they give you a pouch of peanut butter, which is often in the mornings, that's basically what you get, either peanut butter or hard-boiled eggs. And when they're giving you the peanut butter, they call it, meeting their quota for serving protein. But that peanut butter in there is the protein to carb, cholesterol, and sugar ratio is awful. You get very little protein in relation to the sodium, cholesterol, and sugar content of that pouch of peanut butter. And a lot of times you actually have to drain the oil. That's out. You have to drain the oil even when you buy a high quality raw unsalted peanut butter, but it's a different oil in there. So it's the oil just from the peanuts. In this case, in this county jail incarceration pouch of peanut butter that you're getting, it's added rapeseed or cottonseed oil, and this is terrible for you. They would beg to differ, but they're liars, and people who know that LA County is mostly corruption. So it's full of lies and allegations and claims, things that aren't true, and nutrition is one. And I will talk about the medical process in there another day, and that's really bad too. It's still bad. They say they're always making amendments to the process, but it's still really bad. So you eat your breakfast or not, just depends who you are, and if you feel like eating. I've never really felt like eating in there, but some, of course, there have been times when I've been so hungry for real food. I mean, a lot of the times. At any rate, so in the mornings they get you up, and they herd all of the general population inmates, out of the unit or they call it a pod, out of the unit that they're being housed in, and they herd you through the hallway, if need be, on the elevator, and down to, I believe it's the first floor, and into various holding cells where you're with a bunch of other inmates until the buses pull in, and the bus drivers, which are more sheriff's deputies, come with the chains and the shackles, and you'll hear it. It's unmistakable. And they start calling names at about 6 o'clock. So they start chaining and shackling you up to another inmate, starting actually maybe about 5:30 or so. By the time they get you to court, depending on if they have a stopover at the men's county jail, which is something out of hell, and then after the stopover, they call your name again and chain and shackle you to another inmate and put you on another bus. And if there are any stopovers before the court that you're being taken to, then it takes longer. But usually you're inside the court, the assigned court that you're going to, and in their holding cell with the other inmates by about 7:30. And of course, court doesn't start till about 9, and depending on your case and the inmate, what inmate you are and where your case is at, and how your public defender or privately retained attorney chooses to have you called, then you might be called at about 9. You may be called much later in the day, so it all depends. So you can be there all day. That's an overview of a general population inmate. With me, it was a lot different because of the lawsuit that I had forever ago, and they choose to be vindictive forever later and keeping me in solitary when it's unnecessary, because I've never had any, by their low standards, I've had a lot of disciplinary fractions, but they've been petty for failing to follow a direct order, things like that. I mean, nothing that would justify being kept permanently in solitary. But because of the filthy conditions, because if you do share a cell in general population with another inmate, you have no room for your little bit of property. If and you should, you're washing out your clothes. There's nowhere really to hang it. The cells are dirtier actually, and you have no control on how clean you can keep it, because if you're bunking with another inmate, if you're extremely lucky, you'll get an inmate that is sane and you get along with, and you're even partially compatible, so that inmate will work with you and you can work with the inmate, and you can keep the cell clean and relatively, and I do mean relatively, bearable. Other than that, for the most part, it's not that way in general population. So sometimes it's actually preferable to be in solitary, and I found this out because I didn't have a choice, because I'm single celled, and it's a lot easier as far as keeping the toxicity away. And I mean the physical toxicity, because it's so dirty in there. But when you're single celled by yourself, you have that extra bunk where you can scrub and clean it with whatever you can find to scrub and clean it with. And you have a little degree more control over the cleanliness in that cell where you're being confined, which was always my case. So personally, I'd actually rather be kept by myself. And that's how it was with me. And I didn't have the choice anyway, so, there was that. At any rate, with me, what they would do is they would also blast my name over the cell speaker, wake me up at about 4, which I usually knew it was coming, so I would be prepared. If anything tires you out in there, it's the stress, which causes exhaustion. And then being me and being in my situation where they were always vindictive, the staff, there was a lot of harassment and abuse. So I was always stressed out, at a high level anxiety. And this is in addition to the court process that I was going through. And always worrying about my loved ones out here, my loved ones being my children and my Puba, my dog, my angel, my everything. And so the court process has direct bearing on that, because it's going to determine what's going to happen to you. What happens to you determines what's happening to your loved ones. And, and after that, they're the priority. Then, I have a life out here. So, I was running a business. I was doing a lot of positive things. At any rate, so they would wake me up at about 4 every morning, and they would not take me down to the holding tanks with the general population inmates, of course, because they would keep me separate, and they did that with all the K-10 inmates. So it was kind of, not actually bad, because they would have me stay in the cell where I was always confined until the bus was downstairs and had already chained and shackled all of the other inmates. Then they would come up to the cell and chain and shackle me, take me directly down there. What made it worse is they would follow me everywhere with a video camera. It was part of their harassment. They say it's because I was making allegations, which is a crock of bullshit. You know, anything that I said was what they were actually doing to me, because it was always on camera. How could I make any false allegations? They use cameras actually in there for the most part, not for every inmate, but for the most part to demean and harass you, because when you have a camera on you constantly, it's not just an invasion of your privacy, but it's a psychological way to actually torture you, and that's not being dramatic. They were doing that constantly. I wrote complaints, I went through the chain of command, I would speak with the senior deputies and the sergeants about it, and they would not resolve this. They did not need to waste resources on videotaping me and my each and every move, but they would, because it gives them something to feel important about. Because you have to think about it, these are, again, the peasant class, working class. These are people who, they have no importance in life. They really don't have much of a purpose. Yeah, they're sheriff's deputies, and somebody has to deal with criminals, right? You know, someone has to do it, but they're just looked down upon for a reason. You know, they're pieces of shit. And so, and, hell forbid if I was in there again, they would be doing the same thing to me. Not because of a new reason, not because of a new incident that came up, but because of forever ago. Even the new ones that come on, they get it from the ones that have been there. Oh, that's the one. Make sure you go. You take her everywhere, and make sure the camera's constantly on her. Even if they don't do it and there's no incident coming up, they will come back with a camera. And this is how these peasants are. So they would follow me everywhere with a camera, and the general population inmates, seeing me being brought downstairs to this huge area full of inmates with a camera on me, would think that I was in there for murder or some heinous crime, which I wasn't. I was in there for white collar, blue collar, whatever you want to call it. Not that doing wrong things, there's an excuse. Well, mine was to a lesser degree, so it makes me better. No, it's just that it doesn't justify the way they were treating me. And sometimes the more mentally unstable inmates would make some nasty comments, like, what the fuck you here for, things like that. I'm just quoting, not how I speak. But it was there, and sometimes I would just be so fed up that I would let myself be provoked, and I would get nasty back with them. And sometimes, most of the time, I would just ignore it. And they would follow me up out of the building into their what you call a sally port. Everything is locked up. Everything is, of course, control. These are control circumstances. But they would take me up into the bus with the camera on me, put me in a cage within a prison bus, which is what it is. It's a prison bus. Lock it, and still keep the camera on me for a few seconds after that, when I'm stuck sitting in the cage, chained and shackled next to a barred, I wouldn't even call it a window. This is hell on earth. Even being a general population, it's hell on earth. Except I noticed that those GP inmates actually, most of the time, they enjoyed these things. They're yelling for the bus driver to turn on the radio and play the music. Why wouldn't you be more worried about your situation and less looking forward to what music these asshole bus drivers are going to play for you? But these are professional inmates. Would I call myself a professional inmate? No, even though I've been there a lot, because this was never okay for me. I can never get used to it, So wrong is wrong. Whatever actions I committed, I absolutely understand. But sometimes the punishment doesn't fit the crime, and I explained that briefly in my previous video 2 days ago. So then, for me, the bus that I was always assigned to on court dates had a stopover at the men's county jail. And for the stopover, the usual procedure for them was to take me off of the bus, keep me chained and shackled, because I've been deemed a K-10 inmate. Follow me with the camera, get another camera, have another sergeant come on the bus from the men's county jail, train the camera on me, keep it on me while they take me off of the bus and put me in this ancient holding cell where they heard all of the other inmates, and it's already bad. This holding cell seems like 100 years old. Actually, I think it probably is about 100 years old, and they haven't made any upgrades or even improvements to it. There's still a broken faucet on either side of the holding cell. They haven't changed anything. I don't know how they're getting away with it, as far as, I mean, there have got to be laws, for the county and how they can confine inmates for stopovers, but I don't know, they're getting away with it. And then within that holding cell, which is a huge center in the middle of the men's county jail bus yard, there's actually, I won't even call it a bathroom. It's a toilet. They have a toilet to the side. There's just a door that they open, and there's a toilet in there. And then they have next to it a door of bars that they open, and it's just this dungeon. They're both dungeons, but one dungeon has a solid door and a toilet, and one dungeon next to it has a barred door, which it's not solid, so you can see comings and goings, and it's a dungeon, and they would always put me in the toilet. So what started happening is I started arguing with them and telling them that I wasn't getting off the bus. They could just keep me on the bus and deal with the inconvenience until the next bus came and was ready, to go from there, and they can just put me directly on that bus. And I had a lot of run-ins with them, and this was a labor-intensive experience for me, because every court date, it was the same thing. I was arguing with them, and I was figuratively, not literally, figuratively fighting them on this, because I couldn't take it. It was so horrible the way that they would treat me, and I refused to be treated that way. So that was always the fight for me. And then not just being taken to court, but then being brought back from court too. It was the same thing, the same stopover, and they would try to take me off the bus, and I would have to fight them on it. So it was an ordeal each and every time. It involved a lot more than somebody would even think, and people not familiar with this could never even imagine the things that I had to go through. So now the court process itself, once you even get there, which it's difficult getting there. You think, oh, you're on a bus and they're driving you. No, you're in chains and shackles. In my case, I was in chains and shackles and in a cage within a bus. So, and then sometimes the bus drivers would take other inmates to other courts out of the way before they took me to court. And at that time in 2017, they were taking me to San Fernando court on 3rd. So they would actually go to the farthermost courts first and take the inmates and check them in there. And then, so this could be maybe an hour to 2 hours more once the bus left the men's county jail. Impossible situation, but I'm a soldier. I dealt with it because I had to, but it was terrifying and it was hard, but it was something that I just had to deal with. So once they got me to court, I had an enemy situation, not with any inmates ever, but with the staff at the court too. I had never been in that situation with court staff that I was in San Fernando court in 2017. These are a bunch of male deputies that you would think they wouldn't be petty. I mean, they're males. I'm this tiny female. I'm maybe 110 pounds soaking wet, I'm so petite, I'm so small. I mean, what is it for them to be intimidated by, to act, to behave like the fucking assholes that they were? You think they just, just process me in and handle me like the other inmates, except that I was a K-10. But it wasn't like that. Of course, they grabbed their cameras too, and they couldn't wait to get on that bus. Sometimes one deputy at a time, sometimes two deputies at a time, to make it look like I was this really dangerous, out of control, villain. And I wasn't. I was far from that. But that's what they enjoyed making of me. And the more they did that, the more I would respond to it and become angry, even though I knew I shouldn't feed into it. But I would, because some days, some court days, it would be too much. And this is on top of what I had to deal with in the jail itself before being brought there. And this was every time thing for court days. So sometimes it would be a senior deputy, sometimes it would be a sergeant deputy. And in 2017, there were several of these males there that I just, they were disgusting and repulsive. I mean, not just physically, but they were so ugly inside and out. And they got off in a way that, like, the more they abused me, the more they mistreated me, the more they felt in control. Which is why do you need to do that to feel in control with a tiny female, with a tiny woman? But they did. Well, look at them, they're the I guess I can put it this way, they're the cast-offs of society, and they literally work in a dungeon, because where else do you think that people like that, these peasant class people, would be employed but in a dungeon dealing with criminals? So they would come with the camera, take me off of the bus, take me from this locked up Sally Port into this very long hallway that was a ramp that goes down to the lockup, dungeonous, cavernous place in the basement of the court that no one sees except, if you're me and the other inmates and the employees of the unesteemed Los Angeles Sheriff's Department. So I'm not laughing because it's enjoyable. It's this derisive laugh, every time I think about it, and I think about it so much. So they would take me off, and they would not remove my chains and shackles. In fact, they would remove chains and shackles off of the general population inmates as soon as the inmates were escorted off of the bus. And they would even remove the chains and shackles off of the violent crime male inmates who were also K-10s. There were K-1s, K-2s, I believe K-9s. Yeah, K-9 is not just a label, for a police dog. And then there were the K-10s, like myself. And some of these were some pretty big men, and they had committed some really bad crimes, violent, dangerous crimes. They would take the chains and shackles off of them, but leave mine on me, shove me, literally, not just escort me in there, but shove me into a filthy holding cell, where at least I thought it was filthy, and keep me chained and shackled on the excuse of, there were different excuses each time, but basically it was, we can't take the chains off yet, but we'll take them off just as soon as the sergeant gets here, because you're a sergeant escort, because you're a K-10. Ridiculous things. When you're locked up in a cell, why should you have chains and shackles on you? There's no reason for it. And to be on such a long bus ride, and you want to come there and drink water, or if you have to pee because you've been on the bus for so long, it's is such a terrible situation, and it makes even the most well adjusted, emotionally well adjusted, stable person, I mean, angry. And in there, I wasn't well adjusted. I was stable, but I wasn't well adjusted. I was full of anxiety as it was, full of worries, you know. But to do that to me, so I was always asking, and I would try this each and every time. First, I would ask politely, well, can you, I would knock on the door as much as my wrists would allow me to, because my wrists were chained and shackled and stuck to the waist chains. So, you know, if you're knocking, it's like you have to knock like that or kick the door. And I would ask, and I would call out of the door because they can still hear you, even though these are the most solid and thickest doors. Can you please take these off of me? And they wouldn't. If they did bother to answer, it'd be like, oh, you have to wait, you know, in a really smug, blithe manner. So it would get to the point where I would get so angry, so indignant, and I'd start yelling and I start kicking the door and I start then politely knocking and asking again politely, you know, and then I start kicking and knocking and kicking and knocking, and then I'd start yelling, and then they would respond to that. Now they had an excuse, right? Which is what they were aiming for from the beginning. You know, these are men with the proverbial small penises and no balls. And that was just being held in a cell pending the court process for the day. And I had a not a good public defender. I did have a private attorney initially during this case, but he was one of those who would sell you out to the court, you know, which is why he became the sweetheart of the court, because he did that to a lot of his clients, and his Yelp reviews and internet reputation reflects that. So I ended up with a public defender, and he was another loser. I mean, he was not defending me, which has been the case probably most of the times that I've had, you know, in my arrest history. So a lot of the times I would have to speak up for myself in court. And of course, when it was finally my turn to be taken into court, they would keep the chains and shackles on me and take me into court holding my arm. And I was in an orange jumpsuit, which is just a blaring signal that there's something wrong with you. And they enjoyed this. You know, I was a spectacle. They would keep the chains and shackles on me because they would never really take them off. Maybe once in a while. Actually, they never took them off. You know, if anything, they would maybe take one hand out of a cuff, but it was still, you were still chained and shackled, you know. So, and into court, everything, they would, even if that one wrist was out briefly, they would cuff and chain that wrist back up and take me, not allow me to walk, but walk me into the court. And in the audience, there were people there for their own loved ones, or, you know, for whatever reason that they were there, and they would see me walk in, and I could just imagine what they were thinking, which doesn't really matter to me. It's just how I felt, you know, undergoing what I was undergoing, you know. So, and the judge at the time, a Judge Feldstrin, he had not even like empathy, you know, sympathy, or just decency. I guess you can't expect a judge to have empathy or sympathy. If they do, then they're out of the norm and in a good way. But you should expect a judge to be impartial, right? And have that decency. Yeah, that's barely happens. But I can speak of one judge in the past uh, Stephanie Sautner, she really was such a good judge. And not because she did anything for me, that was never the case. She was what a judge should be. So, and she was in LAX court before she retired, but she was professional and she was decent, is what I can say about her. And I can say that she was really, um, she was a good judge. Well, she was a judge, period. And so that was the process, and whatever they decided that day in court to continue the case, whatever. And then they would take me immediately back down into the dungeon, keep me there, and they would try to get rid of me by putting me back on the earliest bus back to the county jail. But then it was never straight back to the women's county jail, CRDF, Century Regional Detention Facility, which is just the hellish jail you can be in. And then there was the stopover at the men's county jail, nightmarish, hellish. And then after a couple hours maybe, then there would be getting bussed in a cage within a prison bus back to the county jail, where those deputies were just waiting to receive me. And I say that sarcastically because they loved manhandling me, you know, off of the bus, and the whole process.